Moments ago, the newest member to the Federal Reserve's Board of Governors, Stephen Miran, telling our own Larry Kudlow, while he's not on board with the slim rate cut.
Look, my view is that there's a number of disinflationary forces in the works that are, I would say, sort of that are coming into play that will be bringing inflation down in the near term. For example, lower immigration. My view is that the supply of housing adjusts only very sluggishly, and if you throw millions of new residents, millions of immigrant residents into a relatively fixed supply of housing, you get lots of shelter inflation. Rents go higher. We've stopped that. The border is closed, and probably well over 1 million migrants have gone home in the first half of this year alone. That, to me, is profoundly disinflationary, and it's in the pipeline.
For more, we are joined by former Trump senior economic advisor and co-founder of the Committee to Unleash Prosperity, which has a wonderful note that they send out every morning. I wait for that with bated breath every day, Steve Moore. It's great stuff. Look it up. You can Google it, folks.
Yeah, I've got to sign up for it.
Oh, it's wonderful. You can't live without it.
He's selling this newsletter, Steve.
I get a little cut in the action. No, I don't.
He's giving the hard sell.
All right, let's talk about the Fed. And I'm very happy that that some common sense has been brought to the Fed in the form of Mr. Miran. But we saw this week one reason or one more example of the Fed getting it so damned wrong, Steve. You and I sent notes about this when it happened. Jay Powell, when he had his presser after they announced the 1/4% rate cut, came out and said he thinks the economy is going to grow 1.6% this year, 1.5% next year. The last print that we had on GDP growth was 3.3%. They get things so wrong because they're extrapolating wrong signals from the economy. They're getting the whole economy wrong, Steve.
Yeah, you're right, David. I couldn't say that better. By the way, let me say something about Steve Miran. I've gotten to know him a little bit. And by the way, oftentimes I don't agree with Stephen. We have, honest disagreements, but I will say this. I'm very happy that he's on the Federal Reserve Board because I think they need different perspectives. The problem that we've had at the Fed for so many decades is it's a groupthink, and they all kind of think the same way. As you know, David, you pointed this out many times. They have a phobia about economic growth. They think jobs create inflation, which is ridiculous. So I think bringing a new fresh perspective to the Federal Reserve Board, even though I don't always agree with them, I think is a very healthy thing. Look, I think the markets like the 25 basis point cut. I'm happy with it. But I've said this so many times on this show and others, the most important thing right now for Washington to do if they want to improve the economy and keep inflation low is not so much cut interest rates, but cut government spending. Because out of control government spending is one of the biggest contributors to inflation. We saw that under Biden.
Steve, obviously Miran's coming under attack by the left for sort of this dual role with the White House also on the Fed board. Right. Are they overreaching here, or is that fair?
He's a talented guy, and I think if he can do both jobs, more power to it. I think that is the decision for the president to make, and he obviously has a high degree of confidence in Steve Miran, so I have no problem with him doing both jobs.
Or Marco Rubio has like 100, right? So.
Marco may have to pare back a little bit.
At least you've got so many jobs, I can't keep track of what you're doing. And David, you're on every other couple hours on the. But look, the point is, if you got somebody who knows what they're doing, and at the Council of Economic Advisors, you need someone leading that who the president has full faith in, and he has full confidence in Steve Miran.
But
it's that simple.
Getting back to the overall Fed. I had Judy Shelton on, a woman who should have been on the Fed, another woman. She was a Trump appointee who didn't make it through the Senate for various reasons, by the way, but that's a long story. The bottom line is she said the Fed is way over its boots. That they are doing much more than they were set out to do when they were started. This huge Taj Mahal on the Potomac that everybody justifiably is complaining about is just a tip of the iceberg. What their real problem is that they think they control the economy, and they shouldn't. That's not why they were started. How do you pare that back? And can Miran be a part of that?
Well, I like the idea that Judy Shelton and David Malpass and Steve Forbes have been talking about, which is the main job of the Fed is obvious, and that is to keep the dollar strong and stable. And that, if you have a strong and stable dollar, you've got an ideal monetary policy. And to make sure, as David Malpass would say, that we retain the global, that the dollar retain its global supremacy and the world reserve currency. I don't want the Fed, David, being involved in climate change. I don't want them to figure out how they can create more jobs, because you can't create jobs by printing money. So if they will create that kind of sound currency, I think all the other Trump policies will have a very positive effect. And by the way, Steve Miran is quite correct. What makes me so angry about Jerome Powell is he says, look, the tariffs are going to cause more inflation. And I happen to agree with him. I think the tariffs do cause upward pressure on prices. But why doesn't he talk about the tax cut lowering prices? Why didn't he talk about the deregulation? How about the fact, I had a friend call me today, paid $2.60 for a gallon of gasoline, Lisa. When was the last time we saw that? So they never talk about the positive things Trump is doing that are disinflationary, that are pro-growth.
Well, and he's clearly frustrated about that. Steve, we want to get you on this as well. So moments ago, the president signing an order to add a $100,000 fee to the H-1B visa. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick explaining why this is needed. Let's listen.
$100,000 per year. So the whole idea is no more will these big tech companies or other big companies train foreign workers. They have to pay the government $100,000, then they have to pay the employee. So it's just not economic. If you're going to train somebody, you're going to train one of the recent graduates from one of the great universities across our land. Train Americans, stop bringing in people to take our jobs.
Steve, we saw a huge debate on this issue recently, with a lot of the Republican base concerned that what you're doing is replacing U.S. workers with cheap foreign labor, and then in a lot of instances forcing these individuals to train their replacements. What does this mean for changes to H-1B visa? Will it cut down on maybe some abuse and overuse, or what do you think?
There might be some abuses with the program, but I've always been, David knows this, I've been an enormous supporter of the H-1B program. And we're talking about computer engineers, technicians, people who've really made Silicon Valley the powerhouse that it is. I mean, you take the best, smartest people from the world, bring them into the country, you then match them up with Yankee ingenuity and talent, and nobody can compete with us. It's the reason we have such a massive advantage.
What about trying to find the best here in the United States?
Well, but let's do both. Let's do both. Let's have the smartest people from around the world come here, and I love this idea of the golden visas. You want to pay $1 million or $5 million to come in? Yeah, do it if you're going to create jobs here in the U.S. Now, there have been some abuses in the program too. One solution, by the way, that I think is better than the $100,000 is, why don't we, if we're going to have, let's say, 200,000 H-1B visas that are used by these companies, auction them. David, what do you think about that?
I think that's not a bad idea. And actually, I think that would appeal to Trump's sense of getting the dynamics of the market in there.
We might even raise more money that way.
Well, by the way, just so folks out there can understand, this is a lot of money we're talking about. There's 700,000 H-1B visas that are given out. 700,000. You multiply that times 100,000, and we're talking about $75 billion that we could get, which leads me to another question of what we do with all that tariff money. You're not a huge fan of tariffs, I know that, but at the same time, we've got all this revenue coming in. Why don't we turn, it's another thing that could be turned right over to the taxpayer, right?
Well, what I would do, you and I disagree a little bit about this, what I would use that money to do is lower tax rates, David, not give it away in rebates. But you're right, why shouldn't we get a little dividend from that? It's a good idea.
But by the way, the other reason why I'm in favor of it is because it would help Trump with his Supreme Court decision that wants to take away his right to do the tax. Tariffs couldn't be considered a tax if the taxpayers are getting their money right back from it, right?
Well, great point, David. You got me on that one. You're exactly right.
But Steve, we were told basically the sky was going to fall with President Trump after Liberation Day with President Trump's tariffs. Are you able to admit that it's not been what, all the concerns and the fears that were put out there? It's not been as bad as what they said?
Lisa, my view
and if
on
anything,
the Trump
we've raised
tariffs,
a lot of money. Sorry, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah. So, what I was going to say is that I'm not, as David just said, I'm not a big fan of tariffs. But I am a big fan of these trade bills and these negotiations. What Trump negotiated with the Brits, fantastic. It's bringing a lot of capital here. It's going to benefit both countries. So I want to see a lot more of that.
All
All right.
Steve Moore, thank you so much, man.
And the newsletter.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I'm getting that
Unleash
to you, Lisa.
prosperity.
Newsletter. I got
Unleash
Google Unleash
prosperity.com and sign
prosperity.
up. It's free.
I've got,
By the way,
yeah,
no
we're
inflation
looking
there,
for a
it's
kick. No, I'm
free.
just kidding. Nice to see you, Steve.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Take care.